My fiancé was having an affair with my best friend. It was a Friday evening when I first had the inkling something was off. Everything had been going so well with Tom. We had been together for 2 years, and for the most part, life was perfect. We were living in a cozy apartment in the city. Both of us had steady jobs, and our wedding was only a few months away. I had everything a woman could want: a loving fiancé and a best friend who was always there for me. Emily and I had known each other since college. She was the sister I never had. We'd been through it all together: breakups, jobs we hated, long nights talking about our dreams. She had always been the rock in my life, and I had never doubted her loyalty. Tom and Emily had become friends too, and I always appreciated that they got along so well. But on that Friday night, something felt different. Tom and I had plans to go out for a casual dinner. We had a tradition of grabbing a bite at our favorite restaurant on Fridays. But that night, as I was getting ready, Tom seemed distant. It wasn't like him. His usual playful smile was absent, and his responses to my questions felt like he was somewhere else. I brushed it off as him having a tough week at work. He had been under a lot of pressure lately, but as I was getting dressed, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. "Hey girl, I'm thinking of coming over later. Got a bottle of wine we can crack open." I smiled and texted back, telling her I was going out with Tom, but we'd definitely catch up soon. But Emily's reply caught me off guard. "Oh, sounds like fun. Hope you and Tom have a great night. Let me know when you get back, okay?" Something about that message felt off to me. Emily was never this distant. We always kept each other in the loop about our plans. Maybe it was just me being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling. We left for dinner, and while we were sitting at our usual table, I couldn't help but notice how quiet Tom had become. The conversation, which usually flowed effortlessly, felt forced. He wasn't his usual self. Every time I glanced up, he was staring into his drink or checking his phone. I tried to ask him what was on his mind, but he just smiled faintly and said, "Nothing. Just tired, I guess." Dinner ended quickly, and on the way home, I noticed Emily's car parked in front of my building. She must have decided to stop by after all. As we walked into the apartment, I heard the soft sounds of laughter from the living room. It was a familiar sound, one I'd heard hundreds of times before when Emily came over to hang out with us. I felt a slight surge of relief. Maybe I had been overthinking things. Tom was just tired, and Emily was just being her usual self. But as we walked into the living room, the sight that greeted me would change everything. There, on the couch, were Emily and Tom, closer than I had ever seen them. They were laughing at some inside joke, their faces inches apart, and their eyes locked in a way that made my stomach churn. It didn't hit me at first. What was wrong with this picture? It wasn't until Tom reached out to gently touch Emily's arm that it clicked. It was the way he touched her. It wasn't the friendly, casual touch I was used to. No, this was different. There was something intimate in it, something that felt wrong. My heart raced as I stood frozen in the doorway. Emily saw me first. Her face instantly went pale, and she quickly stood up, her hands brushing against her pants nervously. Tom turned, and when his eyes met mine, I saw something in them, a guilt that seemed too heavy to ignore. "Hey, babe. I didn't know you were home already," Tom said, his voice tight, almost too casual. I couldn't speak. My mind was racing, but my mouth refused to form words. I looked at Emily, whose nervous smile seemed forced. She was biting her lip, avoiding my gaze. It was then that the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. They had been hiding something, and whatever it wasn't good. "I'll just go," Emily said quickly, moving toward the door. She couldn't get out fast enough. As she passed me, she hesitated for just a moment, her eyes flicking up to mine. But there was no apology in her gaze, no explanation. She just walked out, leaving me standing there with Tom, alone. The silence that followed felt suffocating. I wanted to scream, to ask him what was going on, but all I could do was stare at him, the man I had trusted with my heart, the man I was about to marry. Tom, I finally managed, my voice shaking. What's going on? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, his gaze darting to the floor as if he were looking for the right words. His eyes didn't meet mine, and that told me everything I needed to know. Tom, I repeated, more urgently this time. He finally looked up, his expression full of regret. I'm so sorry, Natalie. The words felt like a slap in the face. What do you mean, sorry? I asked, my voice barely a whisper now. What are you sorry for? I didn't mean for this to happen, he said, his voice low. But Emily and I, we've been seeing each other. I felt the blood drain from my face. My body went numb as his words sank in. Seeing each other? I echoed, trying to process what he was saying. You mean, we've been having an affair? Tom finished, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. I could feel my heart breaking, piece by piece. The betrayal was too much to bear. I thought I knew these people. I thought I could trust them with everything. But now, standing in the middle of our apartment, everything I thought I knew about my life was crumbling. I turned to leave the room, my legs feeling unsteady. My chest was tight, and the weight of the truth was suffocating. But before I could make it out of the room, Tom's voice stopped me. Natalie, please. I didn't turn back. I couldn't. I needed to get away. I needed to breathe. Because the man I loved, the man I was going to marry, had just shattered everything we had. I don't know how I made it out of the apartment that night. My legs felt like they were made of stone, and my mind was consumed by a storm of disbelief and rage. I stumbled down the stairs, not sure where I was going, only knowing that I had to get as far away from that apartment as possible. I ended up at the park, sitting on a bench under the dim glow of a street lamp. The cool air hit my face, but it didn't do anything to calm the burning ache inside my chest. I stared at the ground, my fingers tightly gripping the edges of the bench. It felt like the world had spun out of control, and I was standing on the edge of it, watching it all fall apart. The truth of what Tom had said was still sinking in, and every time I replayed his words in my mind, it felt like a fresh stab to my heart. He and Emily, together? How had I been so blind? I had never suspected anything, not once. They had always seemed like friends. Close, yes, but nothing more. Emily had been my confidant, my partner in crime. And Tom was supposed to be the man who would stand by me forever. He was supposed to be the one who loved me more than anything else in the world. But clearly I was wrong. A faint buzzing sound broke through my thoughts. My phone. It was a text from Emily. Natalie, I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but please let me explain. I stared at the screen, feeling an unfamiliar heat rise in my chest. Explain? After everything? After she betrayed me like this? I couldn't even fathom how she could justify what she had done. But despite the overwhelming wave of anger, something inside me, something small, buried deep down, wanted to hear what she had to say. Part of me needed to understand why. With trembling hands, I typed back, I don't know if I want to hear any more lies. It wasn't even a full minute before she replied, Please, Natalie, meet me. I'll explain everything, I swear. I hesitated, staring at the message for a long time. What could she possibly say that would make this all right? How could she explain this betrayal? But the truth was, I wasn't ready to let go yet. Not completely. So, against every instinct that screamed at me to walk away, I typed back, Fine. But I'm not promising anything. We agreed to meet at a cafe in the morning. I barely slept that night, my thoughts racing through every memory I had with Emily and Tom. I kept replaying moments in my mind, moments I had thought were just innocent, like their late-night conversations or the way they always seemed to be laughing together. Was I just that blind? Was I that naive? The next morning, I arrived at the cafe early, a tight knot in my stomach. The coffee shop was quiet, almost too quiet, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee did little to soothe my nerves. I sat by the window trying to gather my thoughts, but everything felt like a blur. When Emily finally walked in, my heart skipped a beat. She looked as nervous as I felt, her hands gripping the strap of her purse tightly. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw something in them. Regret, maybe, or fear. But whatever it was, it didn't change what she had done. She sat across from me, her posture stiff, as if she were waiting for me to say something. But I couldn't find the words. My throat was tight, and my mind was still too full of questions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emily spoke. Her voice was shaky, but there was a sincerity in it that made me listen, even though everything inside me screamed to walk away. Natalie, I'm so sorry. I've been avoiding you because I didn't know how to tell you this. How to explain. She paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I never wanted to hurt you. You've been my best friend for so long, and Stop, I interrupted, my voice sharp. How could you do this to me, Emily? How? We were supposed to be sisters. How could you betray me like this? Emily flinched, her face contorting with guilt. I never meant for it to happen. It just did. I shook my head, my heart racing. You didn't mean for it to happen? You were supposed to be my friend, Emily. My best friend. And Tom. Tom was supposed to be the man I was going to marry. How could you both do this to me? Tears welled in her eyes and she reached across the table, her hand hovering for a moment before she pulled it back. I don't know. I don't have a good excuse, Natalie. I got caught up in something I never expected. It started with small moments. Conversations when you weren't around, inside jokes, the little things. But it grew. And before I knew it, I couldn't stop. I felt the anger rise within me again, like a tide that was impossible to hold back. So what? You think I'm just supposed to forgive you because it grew? You think that makes it okay? She shook her head quickly, her voice trembling. No, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking for a chance to explain why it happened. I need you to understand that I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Natalie. You're my best friend. I messed up. And Tom. He loves you too. He always has. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was drowning in this betrayal, this mess of emotions. But still, I needed to know. Then why didn't he tell me? Why didn't either of you tell me? Emily's face crumpled. We were both too scared. Too scared to lose you. Too scared of ruining everything. I didn't want to lose your friendship. And Tom didn't want to lose you. But you've already lost me, I whispered, the weight of her words hitting me hard. You've both already lost me. Emily's eyes welled with tears as she looked at me, but I couldn't bring myself to console her. Not after everything. Not after what they had done. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I need time, Emily. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. I don't even know if I can be around Tom after this. Emily stood as well, reaching out to me one last time. Please, Natalie. But I didn't give her a chance to finish. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her hands outstretched as I stepped out into the cold morning air. Everything had changed. And I didn't know if I could ever go back. The days after that meeting with Emily felt like they were moving in slow motion. Every moment was a blur of confusion and heartbreak, each step I took feeling heavier than the last. I avoided Tom's calls, and Emily too. My phone remained silent for hours, which should have been a relief but only made the silence in my mind louder. The truth was, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to lash out at both of them, scream, ask them how they could betray me so deeply. But another part of me, a part that was still clinging to the memories of what once was, my life with Tom, my unshakable friendship with Emily, wanted to know if there was a way to repair things. But how? How could I ever trust them again? How could I move past this? Tom eventually stopped calling. The silence from him, more than anything, hurt. He was the one I was supposed to spend my life with. But he couldn't even bring himself to face me after everything he had done. That was the most painful part of it all. I spent the next few days wandering around the apartment in a fog, doing everything I could to avoid confronting the truth. I packed up some of Tom's things, but every time I picked up his jacket or a pair of shoes, it felt like I was holding a memory that wasn't mine anymore. His presence had been so embedded in the space we shared, and now it felt empty. I would sit on the couch where we used to talk for hours, wondering how I had been so blind. I decided I couldn't keep living like this. I had to see him. I had to confront him. I needed answers. It was a Thursday evening when I finally texted him. "We need to talk." The response was quick, almost too quick, like he had been waiting for it. "I'll come over in an hour." An hour passed in a haze. My heart pounded in my chest. My palms were clammy. I couldn't stop pacing. Couldn't stop wondering what I was going to say. How I was going to say it. Part of me feared that once I said my piece, everything would be final. There would be no going back. When Tom arrived, I was sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded tightly in front of me. I didn't look at him when he entered, and I could tell from the tension in his voice that he was just as unsure as I was about how this conversation was going to unfold. "I'm here," he said softly, standing by the door. I nodded but didn't respond. It wasn't until he stepped closer that I looked up at him. His face was pale and his eyes were filled with regret, but there was something else there too. Guilt, shame, and maybe even fear. "Sit down, Tom," I said, my voice steady, though it was hard to keep my composure. He obeyed, lowering himself into the chair across from me. I studied him for a long moment, watching him shift uncomfortably in his seat. I couldn't bring myself to speak for a few more moments. Instead, I let the silence settle between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I broke it. "Why, Tom? Why, Emily?" His expression faltered, and for a moment he seemed lost. He looked down at his hands before meeting my gaze. "I don't have a good answer, Nat. I don't know how it happened. I'm sorry. I never meant for you to find out this way." "But how did it happen?" I pressed, my voice trembling now. "What was it about her, Tom? Was I not enough? Was our relationship not enough?" Tom's face twisted in pain. He looked like he was going to say something but stopped himself. His eyes filled with emotion, and he opened his mouth several times, only to close it again. "I don't know, Nat. I don't have a reason. I'm a coward. I made the worst decision of my life, and I know I've destroyed everything." He paused, swallowing hard. "But I love you. I always have. And I didn't mean for this to happen. I was stupid. I was selfish." I shook my head slowly, the words cutting deeper than I could have imagined. "You're right. You were selfish. But this isn't something you can undo. You've crossed a line, Tom." He reached for my hand, his fingers trembling slightly. I pulled it away instinctively, not wanting to be touched, not knowing how to process his affection after everything. "Please, Nat," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. If you can't forgive me, I'll respect that. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the man sitting across from me was the man I had loved for so long, the man I had planned to marry. But I couldn't. I couldn't just forget what had happened. "I can't forgive you, Tom," I said, my voice barely audible. "I don't know how. Not now. Not like this." The words stung as I said them, but they were the truth. I had trusted him with my heart, with my future. And he had shattered that trust. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant to destroy us. I stood up, needing to get away from the intensity of it all. My legs were unsteady, and the weight of everything we had shared felt too much to carry in that moment. I need some time, I said, the finality in my voice hanging in the air. I need to think. Tom nodded silently, and as I walked toward the door, I heard him call after me, his voice barely above a whisper. I love you, Nat. But I didn't turn back. I couldn't. My heart was broken, and as much as I wanted to believe in his words, I knew that the person who had loved me, the person I thought I knew, was gone. And so was the friendship I had with Emily. I stepped out into the cool night air, feeling the weight of the decision that I had just made. It wasn't the end of my story with Tom, but it was the end of something. Something beautiful. Something I had believed in. And I wasn't sure yet if I could ever rebuild from this. I was alone now, standing at the crossroads of a life I had built with someone I thought I could trust, and a future that was suddenly uncertain. But one thing was clear. This was a moment of reckoning, and I had no choice but to face it head on. The days that followed were the hardest I'd ever experienced. It felt like I was walking through a fog, everything around me moving in slow motion. The apartment, once a place full of laughter and warmth, now felt like a cold, empty shell. I would wake up every morning with a heavy weight in my chest, dreading the thought of facing another day. Tom hadn't contacted me again, and while part of me wanted to hear from him, to hear him apologize again or beg me to reconsider, I knew deep down that it wouldn't change anything. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship was gone, shattered into pieces. And as much as it hurt, I realized I couldn't keep clinging to something that had been destroyed beyond repair. It wasn't just Tom that I was grieving. It was Emily, too. The thought of losing her as a friend was just as devastating. She had been my confidant, my partner in crime, and now she was the one who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. It hurt even more to know that she had never truly apologized or even given me a real explanation for what had happened. It was like she had taken my place in Tom's life and my heart without a second thought. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, I received a message from an unknown number. "Natalie, this is Emily. I need to see you. Please." I froze, my heart racing. I hadn't heard from her since our meeting at the cafe. It felt like the wounds were still too fresh, and yet, something inside me told me I needed to face her. I needed to hear her side of the story, even if I wasn't sure I was ready to forgive her. I hesitated for a moment before responding. "What do you want?" It didn't take long for her to reply. "I can't do this anymore. I know I've hurt you, and I don't know if I can ever make it right, but I need you to understand something. I've been living in a constant state of guilt and regret. I owe you the truth. Please, let me explain." My mind raced as I read her words. Part of me didn't want to meet her, didn't want to hear anything more. But another part of me, the part that had once called her my best friend, wanted to listen. Wanted to know if there was any chance of healing the broken pieces between us. "Where and when?" I typed back, knowing I was already agreeing to something I wasn't sure I was ready for. She suggested we meet at a small park near my apartment the following afternoon. I agreed, though my stomach was in knots just thinking about it. When I arrived at the park, Emily was already there, sitting on a bench near the fountain. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders hunched in a way that made her seem like a different person entirely. The woman sitting on that bench wasn't the confident, carefree friend I had once known. She looked like someone who had been carrying the weight of 1,000 regrets, and I wasn't sure if that made me feel more sympathy or more anger. As I approached her, she stood up, her eyes brimming with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to offer her comfort. Not yet. "Hi," Emily said quietly, her voice shaky. "I know you probably hate me right now. You have every right to." I didn't say anything at first, just nodded, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know if you can ever look at me the same way again. but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry. I wanted to say something, to demand answers, to tell her how much she had hurt me, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, my emotions a jumbled mess of anger, sadness, and betrayal. Finally, after a long silence, I spoke. "Why, Emily?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to remain composed. "Why did you do it? With him? You knew how much I loved him. You knew we were about to get married. How could you do this to me?" Emily lowered her head, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. She didn't meet my eyes for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked with emotion. "I don't have a good answer," she said. "I wish I could tell you that it was a mistake, that I wasn't thinking, but the truth is, it wasn't a mistake. I thought I could keep it hidden. I thought I could still be your friend and be with him at the same time. But I was wrong. I was selfish and stupid." I didn't respond immediately, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't making excuses. And maybe that was the hardest part, that she had fully acknowledged what she had done. "I was never supposed to fall for him," Emily continued, her voice barely audible. "It wasn't planned, but one day I realized that the way he looked at me, there was something there. And it made me feel wanted, needed. And I know that's no excuse for what I did, but I can't pretend it didn't happen. And I can't pretend I didn't let it get out of control." I felt a wave of nausea sweep over me, the gravity of the situation crashing down on me once again. I had always believed in the bond we shared. I had always believed in our friendship. And now it felt like everything I had known was built on lies. "I trusted you, Emily," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I trusted you more than anyone in the world. And you destroyed that trust." She nodded, her face full of sorrow. "I know, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. But I need you to know, I never wanted to hurt you. I was just, I don't know, lost. I thought I could handle it. But I couldn't." We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. I had so many more questions, so many more things I wanted to say, but I didn't know if there was anything left to say. The person I had called my best friend was no longer the person I thought she was. And the man I had called my fiancé, well, he wasn't the man I thought he was either. "I don't know what to do now," I finally said, my voice low. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Emily. And I don't know if I can ever go back to what we had." Emily's eyes filled with tears again. "I understand, and I will give you the space you need. But please, just know that I will always regret what I did. And if there's ever a chance for us to rebuild what we had, I'll wait for it, even if it takes years." I stood up, my legs shaky as I took one last look at her. My heart was broken in ways I hadn't imagined possible. This was it. The end of a chapter, the end of a friendship, the end of the life I had known. "I don't know what the future holds, Emily," I said softly. "But right now, I need to be alone. I need to heal." With that, I turned and walked away. I didn't know if I would ever heal from this. I didn't know if I would ever trust anyone again. But one thing was certain. I had to start this new journey alone, and I had to find my own way forward, even if it meant leaving behind the people I had once loved most. And so, with heavy steps, I began to walk into an uncertain future, unsure of where I was going, but determined to find the strength to get there. The weeks after meeting with Emily were like a constant battle within myself. I couldn't stop replaying everything in my mind. The conversation at the cafe, the confrontation with Tom, the betrayal that had cut deeper than anything I had ever experienced. It was like I was living in two different worlds, the one where everything had been perfect, and the one where everything had come crashing down. The line between them was blurring, and I didn't know how to navigate the space in between. I had stopped answering Tom's calls completely. I couldn't look at him. The idea of seeing him again, facing the man who had once been the center of my world, felt like something I wasn't strong enough to do. I knew I needed to heal, to rebuild myself, but I didn't know where to start. Emily, on the other hand, had been sending me messages almost daily. Texts, voice notes, even emails. She wanted to meet again, to talk, to explain herself further. But every time I read her messages, I felt the same wave of anger and betrayal. I wasn't sure what she expected from me. Maybe forgiveness, maybe just understanding. But I couldn't give her either right now. It wasn't until one night, nearly a month later, that I found myself standing in front of my apartment building, staring up at the familiar facade, wondering if I could ever return to what it had once meant to me. I had taken a temporary leave of absence from work, needing some time to focus on myself. I hadn't been able to concentrate, hadn't been able to sit still long enough to do anything that required energy or focus. All I could do was think. That night, after another round of sleepless tossing and turning, I decided to take a walk. I found myself heading to the coffee shop on the corner, the one where Tom and I had spent countless mornings together, talking about our future, about the life we would build. As I walked through the door, the barista greeted me with a smile, but I couldn't return it. "Hi, Natalie. The usual?" I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yes, please. A cappuccino." As I waited, I found a seat by the window, gazing out at the street, the city buzzing with activity around me. It was like life had continued on as if nothing had happened. People were out on dates, heading home after work, talking, laughing, completely unaware of the mess in my life, the turmoil that had consumed me. But then, as I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my heart stopping for a moment when I saw the name on the screen. Tom. For a moment, I considered not answering. I wasn't ready to face him again, not after everything that had happened. But there was something about the weight of the call, the fact that he had kept trying to reach me for so long, that made me take a deep breath and press the button to accept. "Hello?" My voice sounded small and distant, even to me. "Nat." His voice came through, rough and filled with emotion. I know you don't want to talk to me, and I get it. But please just let me explain. I owe you that much." I closed my eyes for a moment, pinching the bridge of my nose, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. "What's there to explain, Tom? What could you possibly say that would make any of this better?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked. "I don't know, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I've never been more sorry about anything in my life." I took a shaky breath, trying to hold myself together. "You're sorry? That's it? You think sorry is enough after everything? After betraying me, after lying to me for months?" "I never meant for it to happen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I did, and I can't take that back. All I can do is ask you to give me a chance to make things right, even if it's just so I can make peace with myself." His words were like a slap in the face. How could he possibly expect me to give him a chance after everything he had done? "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." I could hear him take a deep breath. "I understand that. I do. But all I'm asking for is the chance to make amends. Whatever you need. If that means giving you space, if that means answering all your questions, I'm here for that. I just don't want to lose you, Nat. I don't want to lose everything we had." I didn't say anything for a long time. The words were stuck in my throat, and my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. A part of me wanted to yell at him, tell him how much he had destroyed me, how much his actions had shattered my trust in him. But another part of me, the part that had once loved him so deeply, wanted to believe that there was a way forward. I didn't know if I could forgive him. I didn't know if I wanted to, but I also didn't know if I could move on without closure. Finally, after what felt like forever, I said, "I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I'll think about it. That's all I can give you right now. I heard him exhale slowly, as if a weight had been lifted off his chest. Thank you, Nat. That's all I'm asking for. We stayed silent for a moment before I spoke again, my voice quiet. I need time, Tom. I need to figure out what this is, what we are, before I can make any decisions. But I can't keep living in this limbo. I need to heal. I need to be alone. I understand, he said softly. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. I ended the call and sat back in my chair, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had made a small step forward. I didn't know where it would lead, but it was a step, a decision, however small, in a direction I had been too afraid to take. I didn't know what the future held for me and Tom. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let his mistakes define me. I wasn't going to let his betrayal control my life anymore. And with that thought, I finished my coffee and stood up, ready to take another step toward healing, even if it was just one small step at a time. Days turned into weeks, and while I was starting to regain some sense of control over my life, I couldn't escape the constant thoughts of Tom and Emily. The pain still lingered, and every time I thought I was ready to move forward, it felt like something was holding me back. I didn't know if it was love, anger, or the sheer weight of the betrayal, but the uncertainty was suffocating. I had decided to focus on myself, going back to work, reconnecting with old friends, and trying to rediscover the things that made me happy before everything fell apart. But deep down, I knew there was one thing I needed to do to truly move on. I needed closure. I needed to see Tom one last time. It was a Friday afternoon when I reached out to him. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I typed a simple message. We need to talk. It took less than a minute for him to reply. I'll come over tonight. 7 p.m. Please let me explain. At 7 p.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a wave of nervousness wash over me. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and there he was. Tom, standing in front of me, his face drawn and tired, as though he hadn't slept in weeks. Hey, he said softly, his eyes filled with the same regret I had seen in them weeks ago. Hey, I replied, stepping aside to let him in. Let's talk. We sat down in the living room, the same space where we had shared so many moments of love and laughter. Now it felt like a ghost of what it used to be. I didn't know what to say to him, how to start, so I just let the silence hang there for a few moments. Tom was the first to speak. I know this is hard, Nat, and I don't blame you for hating me, but I need you to understand something. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. I looked at him, my heart aching. You say that, but how could you let it go on for so long? How could you betray me with Emily of all people? He closed his eyes, rubbing his face as if trying to erase the guilt. I don't have an excuse for it, Nat. I made the worst decision of my life, and I've regretted it every single day. I don't even know who you are anymore, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I thought I knew you. I thought we had something real. But now everything is broken. There was another long silence before he spoke again. I know, and I've been trying to figure out how to fix it. But I can't fix what's been done. All I can do is hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me one day. I shook my head. I don't know if I ever will, Tom. I just don't know. Just as the weight of his words began to sink in, the doorbell rang again. Who is it? I asked, confused. Tom looked just as perplexed. I don't know. Maybe a delivery? I stood up to answer the door, but when I opened it, I froze. My heart seemed to stop, and for a split second I couldn't process what I was seeing. Standing in front of me was Emily, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, standing in the hallway, was someone I never expected to see again. It was my brother. My mind raced as I stared at them, trying to piece together what was happening. Tom was still sitting on the couch, his face pale, his eyes wide with confusion. I turned back to Emily, my voice barely audible. What the hell is going on? Emily stepped forward, her eyes red-rimmed. I didn't know how to tell you this, but before she could finish, my brother Mark spoke up. His voice was trembling. I'm sorry, Nat. I didn't want you to find out this way. I blinked, my head spinning. What do you mean? What are you sorry for? Emily looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I thought I was the one who had betrayed you. But the truth is, there's something else you don't know. Mark swallowed hard, stepping into the living room. I never wanted to hurt you, Nat. I swear I didn't, but I've been seeing Emily too. I felt my legs go weak, and I had to steady myself against the doorframe. What? You've been with Emily? Tom stood up, his face paling further as the reality of the situation hit him. What the hell, Mark? You knew about us, didn't you? Mark looked at Tom, and for the first time I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. I didn't know it was going to end up like this, man. I swear, it wasn't supposed to happen this way. I felt the ground beneath me shift, as if the entire foundation of my world was crumbling. My own brother? Emily? The betrayal I thought I had already faced seemed like nothing compared to what was unraveling in front of me. I turned to Emily, her face pale and filled with guilt. How could you? You knew how much I loved him. And now you've done this with Mark? Why? Why both of you? Emily's voice broke as she spoke. I didn't plan for any of this to happen, Nat. It was supposed to just be one mistake, and I didn't know how to stop it. And then Mark, she trailed off, unable to say any more. I looked at my brother, my blood running cold. How long, Mark? How long has this been going on? Mark lowered his gaze, unable to meet my eyes. It started a few months ago. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Nat. I never meant to hurt you, but I couldn't stop it either. A surge of rage and disbelief filled me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the tears I had been holding back finally break free. I had trusted them both, loved them both in different ways. And now I had lost everything. They had destroyed the very fabric of my life. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to steady my trembling hands. I can't do this. I can't be here with either of you right now. I turned and walked away from them, not looking back. I couldn't stay. I couldn't face any more lies. My heart was broken into pieces. Pieces I didn't know how to pick up. And as I slammed the door behind me, I realized that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The people I thought I could trust had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way. And now I was left to rebuild, alone. But as I walked away, my heart hardened, and I vowed to myself, no matter how painful it was, no matter how long it took, I would never let them hurt me again. The story I had once known was over. It was time for me to write a new one where I was in control, and no one could break me again.